Hello and welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. This is Dr. Greer, and I'm the director of the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI.org, and DisclosureProject.org. And I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us here every 2 weeks to bring you an update on our projects and the work we're doing and the sort of experiences we're having as a research team. And I'm really excited about today's show. This is a person who I consider a friend and a colleague in many ways. Dr. Lynne Kietei is, of course, well known to many of you listeners as the medical doctor and researcher who came forward very early on with the experiences surrounding the so-called Phoenix Lights that occurred in March of 1997. And a couple years ago, we had her at a conference that we held in Arizona, and she presented just amazing information. And a lot of it is really not known by the wider public about how that whole event unfolded, the kind of evidence that she got. But also, and since we're on the World Puja Network, where everyone is aware of the science of consciousness and non-locality in time and space, the kind of contact that happened and how it was really a very deep, conscious level of contact during that entire episode, which is to this date one of the most mass witnessed and well-documented UFO sightings in history. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Kietei to the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Greer, Steve. I really appreciate it because, as you said, we have so much in common, and we really come from a very similar place of trying to be as scientific and as credible and professional with the data as possible. And actually, I stayed anonymous for 7 years trying to find the logical source and meaning for what I had witnessed and photographed actually 2 years prior to the mass sighting as well as during the mass sighting. My husband, who's also a physician, and I had a very close sighting to our home. We live mountainside in Paradise Valley, Arizona. It's actually mountains around the Valley of the Sun. And we have a panoramic view of the city skyline. We're pretty high up in the mountain. And so we're quite familiar of what planes and helicopters, we look at the panoramic of the city, including Sky Harbor International Airport. So we see planes and helicopters and, of course, streetlights and car lights and all that we were very familiar with. And what we saw literally and figuratively right outside our bedroom window, and I photographed, was just beyond my sense of reality. It was just incredible. I mean, here we had no interest. Both of us are healthy skeptics. One must be when you're a physician, as you know. But we had no interest or knowledge in the topic at all. And here were 3 amber orbs in a pyramid formation, one on top and 2 closely aligned underneath, actually a little below us, behind a private gated residence over very treacherous ground. So there's no way that anybody, and I even looked, was creating it from underneath.
Right.
And here were 3 amber orbs very closely aligned. In fact, my first thought, because I not only in private practice and in family practice and adolescent medicine for over 35 years, but I also have a company that produces video and workbook curriculums on the reality of vital health issues like AIDS and teen pregnancy and substance abuse prevention education, discovery education. Is distributing the programs as we speak. So my first thought was to grab my camera, but my video camera was downstairs. I didn't know how long it was going to last. And as you know, I mean, when someone has an extraordinary experience like this of something anomalous, and most things can be explained, there's a small percentage that cannot. And when you're looking at something that you have no idea exists on this earth, you're in awe. You don't move. You take it all in. And I really tried to take a mental moment. The size, the shape, the color, and so forth. They were about 3 to 6 feet each. And I always go back to this sighting, Steve, no matter what anybody says.
Right.
This was up close. And there's no way it was military in our private gated community. And we're also nestled in the mountains. It would be dangerous for them to even fly here. But at any rate, they were about 3 to 6 feet each, depending on how close they were.
Right.
They were actually oval-shaped, like an egg on its side. And there were 3 distinct objects. And the color within each orb, and I call them an orb because the light did not extend outside the edge, was a uniform amber color throughout. It didn't glare at all. Most when you look at a light bulb, it has a hot spot. This did not. This was uniform amber color, very soothing, very mesmerizing. Every other light out there glared. These did not. And
exactly.
I thought to myself, if I don't get a picture of this, no one's going to believe it. And I go running to the closet to grab my 35 millimeter, which, by the way, is other than infrared, is the best way to capture these things. But also I collect sunset, so I had it handy, and I went to grab it. And my husband calls me back. He says, "Get over here quick. One of them is disappearing." And as we stood there and watched, and I'm talking in wonderment, the top orb, without budging, started to dim. It's difficult to even describe what it did. It started to implode. Did you ever see those dimmer switches, dimmer lights that start to get smaller and smaller?
Exactly,
and smaller?
Yes. And we've had the exact same thing happen on our contact expedition.
Cool. Well, it's very, very slowly, like mechanically. You knew that there was an intelligence behind this, started to get smaller and smaller and smaller until it was a dot, and then it went out. But I have to admit that even though we didn't see it anymore, it felt like it was still there. In fact, when all three went out, it felt like they were there for about 3 weeks after. But be that as it may, I stepped out on the balcony. I mean, where did it go? Another dimension, perhaps. But anyway, I stepped out on the balcony. I clicked a quick picture of the two lower orbs that were still there, and immediately noticed an eerie silence, as if time had stopped. It was just bizarre. And as intently as I'm watching these orbs, I have to tell you, and I didn't share this with anyone until after the mass sighting 2 years later, it felt like something was watching me. And going through my mind, I was thinking, who are you? What are you? Do you know that I'm here? I'd love to meet you. That's exactly what I was thinking. The next thing I remember, the left bottom orb started to dissipate, just like the top one did, getting smaller and smaller, and I quickly shot a picture of that. I don't remember anything else. I really vaguely recall maybe the last light going out. I don't remember going back inside. My husband was inside. I was outside on the balcony. I don't remember looking at the time. I just don't remember even going to bed.
Right.
But I have to tell you, Steve, I mean, for 2 years, well, first of all, only one picture turned out at the time. I mean, that's a whole story that I go into detail in the book. But there were so many serendipitous events that happened. I've come not to believe in coincidence anymore. But at any rate, only one picture turned out at the time, but it was magnificent. In fact, if anyone is near a computer and can get on the phoenixlights.net, the phoenixlights.net, Phoenix Lights Network, if you Google Phoenix Lights, it usually comes up first. And get to the photo page, you'll see the topography. And this is really interesting because aside from these objects appearing in the same general area, 6 months before the mass sighting, and if you look at the first picture, you'll see there's two mountain ranges that we look at from our home. One is South Mountain on the left,
right,
and the other, a number of miles back, are the Estrella mountain ranges. Now, in between those two mountain ranges, and right where they intersect, and you can see that in the first picture there, is the Gila Bend Indian Reservation.
Right.
Now, I happened to be invited 6 months before the mass sighting. And by the way, I wondered for 2 years what this advanced technology was, and the only picture that I had at the time was the one that had the orb half disappeared and one still there, which was incredible. I mean, here I captured it in action, knew something really miraculous had happened, but I didn't even know who to show it to. I knew no one involved with the topic, and just wondered for 2 years what this advanced technology was doing outside our bedroom window. Anyway, 6 months before the mass sighting, I was invited to present my substance abuse prevention education program at the Gila Bend Indian Reservation School. They only have one school there. And I got friendly with the principal and some of the board members and so forth. They don't really talk to outsiders, but I helped them out. And after the mass sighting, I started to notice that, because I had more pictures come forward, and noticed that these phenomena kept popping up right where South Mountain and the Estrellas intersect.
Right.
So I called them up and I said, in science we look for repeatability, and here I'm finding that these phenomena are occurring right around the same spot that your reservation is. Did you happen to see any strange lights on March 13th?
Uh-huh.
And they started to giggle. And I said, is that funny? And they said, are you kidding? Not only were they looking right up at them on March 13th, but they've been looking up at them for centuries. They call them sky people, light beings. It's part of their culture. In fact, the Estrellas got the name because the Spaniards that discovered the area heard all these history, and there's petroglyphs that actually are etched on South Mountain and the Estrellas that are identical to the footage and the video and the 35 millimeter that I've captured of these orbs in triangle formation and so forth. And
well, we were just at in Arizona at the Tonto National Forest, and we were up near New River about 2 months ago. And we had a contact team, where we had the most amazing contact that happened. And we hiked up to the top of a mountain in this 5 million acre Tonto National Forest. And on the top are these basalt, very old petroglyphs. And in those petroglyphs are these sort of symbols of what look like ET beings and other things that are there. And this is not a place where you would have had a village down by a river. This was a place where you would have gone up, and it's shaped like Silbury Hill. If you look at this mountain, it looks exactly like Silbury Hill in England, and it was clearly a place where they would go up to the sky. And
well, I trust that there are many places.
Contact.
Right, exactly. Well, they actually call the Estrellas the gateway to the stars, and they believe that there is a portal or a gateway in that area. And when you look at my data, and I always say the data speaks for itself, but you have to look at it first. If you look at the data, you'll see, I mean, just consistently these phenomena happen, and they happened again. I didn't see anything for 2 years. And for almost 2 years. And 2 months before the mass sighting, this is really significant, Steve, because people don't know this unless they are familiar with my work. 2 months before the mass sighting, the lights appeared again. These orbs appeared again, huge, but at a distance. And they caught my attention immediately. One wall of our bedroom is a window, so anything that pops up out there, whether it's, fire or the hababs that we had or whatever they are, the dust storms, we get to see them firsthand. And when these lights started popping up in different formations, again, I don't know if it's a scientist in me or whatever, but I really felt compelled to document them again on film. The second night of which I happened to catch the exact same phenomena, mile-wide phenomena, that I would also capture on video during the mass sighting. This is 2 months before, January 23rd, 1997.
That's right.
Head on, turning into a V. Now, if you look at the photo page, you'll notice the first picture there, I was shaking because I had seen three lights appear at about 8 o'clock. My husband was at a hospital board meeting at the time, and I noticed three lights, and I figured, enough, I'm going out and videotaping them, and I grabbed my video camera, and it was fully charged, by the way, and I got out to the front area, and I got about 18 seconds worth, and the battery went dead.
That's right. And you know what happened? We were just at an event where we were in Florida, and we were having contact. When Pete, you see the videotape, you're not going to believe it, these orbs, but we're talking within 20 feet of us. Every single battery on site got zapped to zero. And
well, there you go, but I had no idea.
This is a known electromagnetic effect. Yeah. We've had this happen hundreds of times.
There you go.
We had 20-some people there on the beach with us at Marco Island, and these objects came from the Gulf of Mexico, and one actually launched from the Gulf and then landed in a grassy field where we were within 20 feet of where we were meditating and making contact. And suddenly everyone, this was nothing just one or two people saw, these brilliant lights began to come on and off, and all the electromagnetic systems that were out there, even things that were fully charged, had brand new batteries in them, started just going zap and went to almost zero, although we did get everything filmed. But that's a known phenomenon.
Right, and actually it happens with pilots quite frequently, and I'll get to that because military jets were sent out on March 13th. I'll talk about that, and that actually happened. But at any rate, about a half hour later, well, when after the battery went dead, I went inside, and by the time I got outside, it was gone. About a half hour later, about 8:30, my husband comes up the drive from his meeting, and I go outside, and I said, honey, remember I told you I saw 3 lights, and that was the first time I had seen them since 95. There were 3 lights in a row, equidistant from each other, far west. I said, well, about a half an hour ago, they were right in front of South Mountain, and I knew that they were in front of the mountain because there's red blinking lights on the mountain alerting planes coming into Sky Harbor, which is just north of the mountain range.
Right, so they were below
They were
top.
definitely lower, yes,
Yeah.
definitely. But at any rate, I said they were right there, and as I'm pointing, Steve, they reappeared in the same spot. And I was like, whoa. I mean, I know that you've had experience like this, but at that point, it was like, gee, what is going on here? So I ran upstairs. I grabbed my 35 millimeter. And again, I've come not to believe in coincidence, and 35 millimeter is really an exemplary way to study and analyze these pictures because they're on a negative. But at any rate, I got out on the balcony. I'm ready to shoot the 3, and suddenly 6 lights across, massive span, over a mile wide, equidistant, totally equidistant, pop up above the 3. I was shaking. I mean, not having had an explanation for the sighting in 95, the close sighting in 95, and then having this gigantic thing appear out of nowhere, I thought, my goodness, what is this, a mothership or a fleet? And I started clicking away.
Good.
And I actually caught this head on, turning into a V shape, and you can see those pictures on the photo page on the phoenixlights.net website. And it was so unnerving, Steve, that I was tossing and turning all night, and by the morning it was like, okay, there must be a logical explanation for this. I'll just hunt it down. Somebody else had to see this. It was massive. So I called around. There's a long story to that that I share. And I finally got a hold of air traffic controllers at Sky Harbor International Airport who saw the same thing at the same time. In fact, they were more excited than me. One of the fellows who's a meteorologist got on the phone first, and he's a really mellow guy, and the first thing he said, did you see the 6 lights that were equidistant from each other hovering in a formation last night at 8:30? I said, yes, that's why I'm calling. He says, well, actually, there were 3 at 8 o'clock. I said, I saw those too.
Right.
He said they looked on radar in both instances, did not show up on radar.
Right.
Which was alarming to them because it actually appeared in Class B restricted airspace. There's a 30-mile radius around the center of the airport where any aircraft that comes into that area, particularly 1,000 feet altitude as these phenomena were, must call into the tower, and no one did. So they immediately got their binoculars to look. And in their own words, they described 6 points of light, totally equidistant from each other, massive span, that seemed to be attached to something, but they couldn't quite see what it was attached to. In fact, you would hear that again and again on March 13th, not only that description, but also craft, which I'll get to in a sec. But and the meteorologist says not only did they see this, but it turned against the wind as a unit while I'm taking pictures of it at the same time, and then moved in synchrony behind South Mountain. So I said, so what was it? And there was silence, and then one of the air traffic controllers said, beats me. I said, you're air traffic controller. You're supposed to know it's in our airspace, and this was in restricted airspace. You don't know what it was. They, at that point, established it was definitely nothing that they could even imagine being there. It wasn't flares. It wasn't people with balloons or parachutes or anything that they could imagine. And we kept in contact, and I continued documenting these phenomena on film up into and including March 13th. And for any of the listeners that are not familiar with what happened here in Arizona, there is so much misinformation and disinformation out there. I'd like to just set the record straight once and for all, because from obviously being a videographer from that night and being conscious of these phenomena for 2 years prior, I was extremely meticulous in noting everything. In fact, I started keeping an intricate diary every single day. I mean, I pushed my entire medical career aside for 4 years to try to find a logical source of meaning once I knew thousands of people had seen what I had seen. But on March 13th, actually, I saw one lone light far west. And, sir, serendipitously again, about 2 weeks before, it was getting a little ridiculous. I kept running out to take pictures of these things, and my husband and I would be in an intimate moment. I would say, hold that thought, and run outside. I really felt compelled to get these on film.
Right.
And it was getting silly already. And I started showing the video, and I have to say that the video does not do the lights justice. In the video, they're much smaller, they flicker, they're white, could be mistaken for flares for somebody with an untrained eye, even though the formations themselves are very compelling. So I started showing them to my friends to see if anybody knew anyone involved in the UFO field. This is how close I was, Steve. A friend of a friend had a neighbor who had a friend who knew the past president of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. So I gave him a call. I said I was seeing these lights. He hadn't heard about it, but I have to say there were other people. In fact, one of the other videographers that shot an arrowhead with a group of MUFON people, he had called MUFON to his home because he was seeing these things as I was for days before. And he hadn't heard about it, but he referred me to a field investigator, and I said, I have a picture from 95 that I'd love someone of credence to take a look at as well. I know it's authentic, but I'd like somebody to look at it and analyze it and so forth. So he refers me to a MUFON field investigator for the following week. We had an appointment on Wednesday. Tuesday, he calls to cancel or postpone. The only window of opportunity I had for another 2-3 weeks was Friday morning. He says, fine. Well, little did I know, Thursday night, Hale-Bopp is clear in the northwest sky. Thousands of people are outside looking purposely at the sky for a glimpse of the Hale-Bopp comet, when they also caught a glimpse of 1 mile to 2 mile wide, in some very credible reports, formation of these lights that seemed to be attached to something, V-formation, or craft. And by the way, and we're talking very low gliding. Some people said it was rooftop. They could have thrown a rock at it. Totally silent, whatever the phenomena was. And again, there's so much misinformation out there. I mean, we're talking, these phenomena started, we have witnesses that started seeing them about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, daylight.
Yeah, give the date of that.
Yes, this is March 13th.
Right.
1997. About 5:30, there were witnesses, Native Americans actually in New Mexico, that were seeing these phenomena. 7:15, I have reports from California. 11:30, there was a whole commercial crew and 140 passengers that were on their way from Phoenix to California. This is a really interesting story that I'm just sharing for the first time in the latest edition of my book. They have stayed anonymous for obvious reasons, but they see this mile-wide phenomena hovering over Vegas, covering Vegas, and called into the radar tower to ask if they're getting anything. And another commercial airline called in all frantic because they were right near it, saying, what the hell is this, and et cetera. And suddenly a different male voice comes on, very authoritative. Tell me exactly what you're seeing and where, and, all this. And it kind of freaked them out, and they said, we're not seeing what we thought we saw. It must have been a mistake. And they continued on their way. Well, about a half hour later, you're going to find this really interesting. And I'm sorry I'm getting off the track, but it's an interesting story. About a half hour later, they see, and they're at 30,000 feet, they see a bright light about 1 mile away and realize that it's a flare. And almost simultaneously, a military jet with afterburners on the opposite side of the plane going in the opposite direction goes right by them, even closer. And one of the pilots almost, jumped out of their chair. And they were freaked. They just knew that somebody was trying to tell them to, keep a lid on this. And so, all this is going on March 13th. Also, about 3 a.m. the next morning, there was a call from an alleged crewman from Luke Air Force Base to the National UFO Reporting Center, Peter Davenport. Very detailed. In fact, some of the recorded messages in the document, on our Phoenix Lights documentary, and I have the text in the book, describing in great detail, very professional, names and serial numbers and the whole bit, that there was a craft hovering over the center of Phoenix. And this is when I first saw one light. And I didn't even jump up to get it because I figured I'm seeing the guy the next morning anyway. I had enough. About 8:20, 8:30, right over Phoenix was one of these craft. And the military jumped to attention, sent out jets with afterburners, and we have civilians that saw this.
Oh, yeah.
And as they got
I was
closer,
there.
yeah, right. As they got closer, about a mile away, again, the instrumentation in their cockpit went haywire, and as they got even closer, the lights started to dim, and then the whole thing disappeared.
Right.
And it freaked out one of the pilots. In fact, the crewman said that he was one of the people to help one of our pilots out of his aircraft because he was so shaken up by it. And then at 5:30 the next morning, by the way, there was a Boeing crew that reported to me that they actually saw one of these craft hovering over their tarmac at 5:30 when they were coming into work. So this was going on for many more hours than the media would have you believe.
Right. So there's a lot of details, and I just want to kind of get to some, since we only have an hour, some bigger picture issues here. One of it is that there's a context in how all this was happening. Because, as you know, from talking to people on our contact team in Arizona, we had just been in Mexico just before this event happened, where we had been at Popo, the big 18,000-foot volcano outside Mexico City, where we had contact. And the photograph you have that's of looks like three amber golden in a sort of pyramid shape, that was hanging out right in front of a hillside when we were having contact, and it was there for literally 45 minutes without moving. In fact, we thought it had to be lights in it, but it wasn't. It was like this light like you've never seen. And it was all this contact. And it was this amazing conscious contact that was going on. And we had these light beams that literally moved right into our sight that you could see with the naked eye. After that happened, I had to come back. We were preparing to do the congressional briefings. If people go and look at the history of disclosureproject.org, before we came out public in 2001, in 97, I had organized a series of briefings for members of Congress. Right. So there were chairmen of committees there. There were top brass from the Pentagon. There were people from the Vice President, Al Gore's office, and the President's office, et cetera, and so on. And just before that briefing, I had come out to Phoenix to go to an undisclosed location of someone who had a digital laboratory to put together what we call the BAE, the best available evidence of photographic and video images, to give to these members of Congress and to White House and other Pentagon people who were out of the loop on this, but who were interested and supportive of disclosure. And so I was on a jet. I was sitting on a U.S. Airways jet flying into Sky Harbor Airport. You said at 5:30, we were coming in over New Mexico and into Arizona, and I sat in meditation and did the CE5 contact protocols, literally, at that time. And I was we were flying into the airport, and I was asking the ETs if there were any in the area to do something that would be so unmistakable that we could put in this briefing of best available evidence to give to these members of Congress and other people who we had networked to over the previous few years to get this information to the right folks and help facilitate and prepare people for disclosure. What happened is that about 3 hours later, I was at this digital lab, and it was in an area around Phoenix called Tempe, or near there. And suddenly this retired general comes running in, and he says, "You won't believe what's happening," and this is going on right above us. Now, we actually included into this briefing that we were giving to these, we're talking chairmen of committees, we're talking the next day after that briefing, I went over to the Pentagon and personally briefed the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff with astronaut Edgar Mitchell and others. We put the Phoenix lights that were on the news that night, because it did make it to the local news, if you remember.
Not that night.
Well, or a couple nights, whenever it was. It made it in long before it came out on ABC News in June.
Oh, yeah.
It was first covered locally, and they kind of kept the lid on it until...
Well, I'll tell you how that happened.
Yes, I know how it happened. So anyway, the point I'm making is that we were able to grab that because it was a few weeks later in April that we were having this meeting. And so there's a conscious contact component of this whole story that's a backstory that never gets talked about. And
well, I have to share that there's even more to that, Steve, that I think you'll really appreciate, because not only were there a number of different crafts, and by the way, if anybody gets on the website and looks at the GAP page, Geospatial Animation Project, it's really important to note that there was a parade throughout the state of multiple things happening. Not only did people see these orbs detach from the main object, go out into the environment, and then redock with it, and there were a number of people that saw this, which may be what happened in 95 to my husband and I, because when you look at those photos, and like I said, the data speaks for itself, it's there. In the background is the same exact phenomena in the same exact location in 95. Right. Which is unbelievable. But in the meantime, there was a 12-year compilation of hundreds of reports from the UFO Reporting Center in Seattle, Washington, the National UFO Reporting Center, Village Labs, which is a clearinghouse locally, Arizona MUFON, and then Councilwoman Vice Mayor Frances Barwood, who, by the way, was the only elected official who months later in May simply asked, she didn't see it, but she simply asked because her constituents were just in awe that there wasn't, and actually horrified that there wasn't any kind of investigation, which we'll get to in a second. But at any rate, hundreds of reports to show, and they were compiled by investigators and illustrated on the website. Larry Lowe did a beautiful job illustrating the 8 or 9 different craft that people described. Now, whether it was one craft that could morph into looking differently, and I'm talking very differently, because, and this is really important, not only did some of them split in two, there's one of them that has, it's a giant V shape, that each light is 3 lights. I found in my inquiry after the mass sighting that 1 month before our mass sighting, on February 19th, 1997, and there's 2 videos that civilians captured that are identical to what two different craft that people were seeing here throughout Arizona. One of them, it's just miraculous. So, in fact, we have it on the cover of or the latest edition of our documentary, because it just blew me away that there was a similar mass sighting 2 months before ours. And I had no idea, by the way, that this was happening worldwide until a week after the mass sighting. Anyway, I walk in the next morning. Well, let me go back a second. At 8:20, I saw 1 lone light. About a half hour later, a little after 9 o'clock, I see 1 lone light far south. And it got my attention because it was in a totally different part of the sky. Usually they would show up in about the same area. But I noted the time, and that's when people were actually seeing these phenomena in Tucson, 2 hours south of Phoenix.
Right.
About 10 o'clock, it was, they usually do the advertisements about 10 o'clock. We were just watching the ad for the upcoming news, and suddenly the same 6 lights pop up that I had captured on 35 millimeter, which, by the way, didn't turn out at the time. There's a whole story with that 2 months before. So I was thrilled that I could capture this again, and I ran outside with my video camera. By the time I got out there, 3 had disappeared, and I caught the 3 end lights, which looks like a giant V or triangle that hundreds of thousands of people had described statewide. And I was thrilled that I had captured something, walk into this guy's house the very next morning. Now, mind you, we had canceled from Wednesday to Friday, and the first thing he says to me, this MUFON investigator, is, did you see the mass sighting last night? I said, well, we saw something similar to, what I described 2 months ago. He said, no, you don't understand. Hundreds, if not thousands of people saw this mile-wide triangle formation, the V formation of lights or craft, and NBC was coming to interview him in a half an hour. I said, whoa, I used to do health reporting in the early 80s, actually in the 70s in Philadelphia with Jessica Savage, and then in the 80s here for NBC, and I said, I don't know what we're dealing with, if it's a hoax or military or whatever, but it's not about me anyway. It's about the data, and it always has been about the data. I've shared from day one, and I said, take a copy of what I took last night so people can see what we saw, and I'm out of here. And in the meantime, I called the air traffic controllers again, and they saw the same thing at the same time. I was documenting this also in Class B restricted airspace. By 4:30 that afternoon, my video was plastered on every news station. It was just really exciting. And by 9 o'clock, there were a couple others. There's a couple boomerangs and the arrowhead. Well, this was like, Steve, I mean, now thousands of people saw what I saw. What is going on here?
That's right.
And the following week, I see Jim Delatoso who was an investigator, actually had a computer lab here and was also analyzing pictures from all over the world, that he was showing from his vast database these triangle formations of orbs that just blew me away. I mean, that was the first I ever heard of it, that this was happening worldwide, from Germany and UK and Israel and Iraq and all over the world. And that really set me on a journey to find a logical source and meaning. And I started keeping a journal, ended up with a 750-page journal 4 years later of incredible data. I mean, as you know, and I'm sure most of your listeners know, that these phenomena have been showing up since human documentation began. And, not only are there drawings...
Well, it's interesting because we were just, in England last year. We have some amazing photographs that are... we'll be in this new film that's coming out that we're working with,
cool.
Which people can find out about at Sirius.neverendinglight.com, Sirius, Sirius, .neverendinglight.com. And in this, when we were in England, there's a place there near Alton Barnes where there have been a lot of the most amazing crop circles that have appeared over the years. And there's a hill called Golden Ball Hill, and there's also one called Shield Hill. So back in the Roman and even Celtic times, people would see these golden amber orbs and spheres. Well, we're there doing this, and suddenly one pops up right outside our circle. It looks like the sun has risen, literally, and it's the most amazing photograph. And what you find is that this is not, it's been going on since the beginning of human civilization, and of course it's always been mythologized, but in reality, what you find is that often within those energy fields are an entire craft filled with people. In other words, I remember going to Belgium, and if you remember near the German border in Belgium back in the early 90s, late 80s and early 90s, there was this whole wave of these sightings, and I went over there, and when I just had formed CSETI.org, and I went over, and, this is now 21 years ago, and we were over there, and I interviewed these police, what they call them gendarmes, which are sort of like police, military police, and they were near this little town. It was near Henri-Chapelle, and there was a massive triangle about 800 feet on each side that had fully materialized over a square of this little town right above the steeple. And it was like 10:30 at night, so everybody was going, good God, what is this? So they go out. Now, the part that got left out of all the UFO organization reports and the military report, because the Belgian Air Force got involved with this, NATO got involved, we actually interviewed the Belgian Air Force people and NATO folks. The thing that is left out, and it's left out because people are trying to maintain their credibility by trying to squeeze this phenomenon into a linear 20th century box.
Right.
And let me tell you what happened, is that this massive craft that was the size of 3 football fields on each side, the same size as the one that we had in Mexico that came from the volcano towards us, this suddenly collapsed and just instantly morphed into a red-orange orb that was just hovering there, the size, he said, of like a soccer ball. And it went from there to and vanished and went straight instantly.
Right.
So this part of it is what was, well, let me finish. This part of it is what was covered up by the, because it didn't fit into linear understanding. And one of the things that we have to bring out in this new film that we have this Emmy Award-winning filmmaker doing with us is the transdimensional nature of interstellar civilizations. If they're interstellar and they're here, they have to go between dimensions to get here. They can't go linearly. And this is kind of common sense if you think about it, because if you're going at the speed of light, if you're from the Andromeda Galaxy, and it's 2.5 million light years from here, even if you go at the speed of light linearly, it's 2.5 million years each direction. So you have to begin to understand the physics and the science of interdimensional, transdimensional civilizations, and that's what people are encountering.
Possibilities.
And that's what a lot of people witnessed in Phoenix. But this is another part of it that has actually not been talked about because it doesn't fit the aerodynamic mythology, the whole mythology. There's something you have to kick the tires on it, and it's got to be this sort of machine. I said, well, if it looks like that, it's made by Lockheed Martin. You know, we've been building anti-gravity devices since the 50s. These other things are transdimensional, which is what's so exciting, because it's a glimmer into an entirely new physics science that interfaces with consciousness. And this is why the CE5 protocols work, is because when you start to move out of linear space-time and you get into these more and more subtle areas of dimensions, that's where thought and consciousness interfaces with science and technology, and it's a very exciting view of the future, or of now, if we would embrace it.
Absolutely. Well, that's why I'm sharing for the first time in the updated version of my book of what has happened since I came forward in 2004 after 7 years of anonymity, data that actually was analyzed by a Navy optical physicist, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, way back in '98. The first and the last pictures, and they're up there on the website, thephoenixlights.net, and they're also the 21-page report is there as well. Which I'm getting off the track because I really want to talk about the consciousness that was happening during mass sighting too, but this is really important. I think you'll really appreciate this, Steve, is that he took my first and last pictures from the closed sighting and said to me, you told me that it was only a couple-minute deal. I said, that's right. That's what I remember. That's what my husband remembers. He confirmed it. He said, that's impossible. I said, what do you mean? He says, look at the pictures. Now, I shared with you the closed sighting, and that's what I remember of it. He said, number one, the same phenomena that happened 2 months before the mass sighting and during the mass sighting is in the same location in the background. So whoever did this was there then too, okay? That's number one. Number two, he said, look at the skyline. There's many more lights, groups of lights, not just individual lights, but groups of lights that are on in the first picture that are off in the last picture. He said, that doesn't happen in a couple minutes. He said, I want you to do an experiment. Get out on the balcony, stand where you were standing in 95 approximately, and capture the skyline. This was 3 years later, one night every hour, one night every half hour. I actually did it another night every 15 minutes, and we'll see when the groups of lights start going out. Well, I usually take a bath between 7 and 8, and so let's be conservative. My husband called me out of a bath. Let's say the starting point's 8 o'clock. The first groups of lights start going out at 9. The last picture is indicative of 10:30, 11 o'clock. Now, I couldn't wrap my head around this. I had no idea what he was talking about. He says, can I present this case at the upcoming 1999 MUFON International Symposium? I said, listen, in Washington, D.C., I said, Dr. Maccabee, you're the one that discovered this. I would have never in a zillion years noticed any of this. It's your baby, but just keep my name out of it, which he was kind enough to do. Well, he presented it in 1999, and I kept it totally private for over a dozen years as the first photographic evidence ever of missing time. Now, the reason that I'm sharing it now, I still can't get my head around it, but like you said, I mean, if it can help, because, again, I don't believe in coincidence, and I have this data. How can I just keep it in a drawer? If it can help not only move us forward to realize that linear time is not real time, that past, present, and future is primitive, that we've established that as time, but time is much bigger than that. Oh. And now the quantum physics and quantum mechanics, as you know, is talking about bubble theory and string theory with 10, 11 different dimensions. If there's other times and spaces along with ours, then why is it such a leap to think that there may be other intelligences in those other times and spaces that we get glimpses of if we're open to them or invited?
Not only that, they traverse those other dimensions. If they have a physical body, a physical spacecraft, and a physical world, but it's very far away, but they're very advanced in physics, they're going to drop out of linear space-time, this dimension, 3D, or 4D if you want to count time, into and pass through these others. This is what people have to begin to understand. And, you know, it was funny because years ago I was doing a briefing for the Institute of Noetic Sciences Board of Directors, and then we had dinner with Senator Claiborne Pell and some other people, and there was a UFO person there who I don't want to name who was saying, well, these aren't extraterrestrial, they're interdimensional. And I went, excuse me, this is like saying an orange is round, but it's not orange. It's both, for God's sake.
Right.
And it's like, you know, this is the most obvious. I mean,
it's like could be all of the above. I mean,
it's of course all of the above because there's physical evidence, and there have been craft when they fully materialize that we have hit with scalar electromagnetic weapons. I have multiple military people on my team who have actually handled the materiel and the dead ET bodies, and yet when they're in this high physics mode of functioning, they go interdimensional or transdimensional. And of course they would have to. Moreover, if that is their operating system, let's just call it like we have a computer operating system, if that's their operative paradigm, they could be outside your window, but not fully materialized three-dimensional, and all you're going to see is this orb-like or plasma-like energy field, and it can be very subtle or very pronounced. It may be able to be photographed. It may not. It may appear on radar, or it may not, because the materiality of it, if we can call it that, is dependent on, it's just like you said earlier, a rheostat, a dimmer switch, where it can be moved further into this dimension or further out into these transdimensional energy forms. And that is something that is so key for people to understand when they're having the kind of experiences that you have.
And that's why I'm so glad, and I appreciate you letting me share it, because not only that, if you get on the photo page, again, the last two pictures of sunsets, I collect sunsets, and I had like 5 rolls of film in 2000, November and December, on 2 different rolls. And
I saw those.
I did not see what is in the negative in either time. But in the negative, there's a rod, cigar-shaped objects in the same spot, in 2 different muds. So they're there. We just don't get to see them again unless we're open to them or invited. And on March 13th, I want to just get back to that for a second because I think you'll appreciate this as well. Not only, with the 8 or 9 different craft and the lights that seemed to be attached to something, or there was a force field in between. I mean, it was a parade happening throughout the state. And that's what the investigators here that have been studying this for 15 years believe as well, that these phenomena could morph and look differently. And there were a number of different things happening, and even the perspective from where the person was standing. But I have to tell you, which was really one side of this whole picture that is never talked about, and this doesn't happen with flares, or we didn't even get into that discussion, how that came out, but flares or blimps or whatever, is that in real time, now 6 months before the mass sighting, the movie Independence Day came out. And we address this in the documentary. We are so inundated with fear, and threat that, Dr. Gary Schwartz, who's the head of the Consciousness Study Department at the University of Arizona, makes a very poignant statement in the documentary. He said, if you're afraid of something and you see something you're afraid of, how do you think you're going to react? So kids were scared. They were jumping up and down. When they saw this mile-wide formation of lights coming towards them, they were jumping up and down, Independence Day, Independence Day. But as it got closer, not only children, but adults as well, a calmness came over them. A connectedness to the phenomena. In fact, there has not been one report, not one, Steve, in 15 years of harm, threat, or abduction associated with the Phoenix Lights. I can't speak for other things, but there is not one report. It's the total opposite. People were in awe and wonder. People still say that it was miraculous and that they feel blessed that they had this experience. And actually, as the phenomena passed right over their heads, and some people, it was right above them. I mean, they literally, we have a couple of witnesses in a pilot in the documentary. The wells, the giant wells, they call them, or canisters of light, were right above them. And as this is happening, they felt a connection to the phenomena, and some of them even had telepathic messages telling them to stay calm and that it wasn't here to hurt them. So there was a lot going on, and like I said, that doesn't happen with flares.
No, exactly. And the other thing is that this is so true because, you look at, in the last 2 years, there's been something like 18 terrifying movies that have come out of Hollywood, from Battle Los Angeles to whatever. And about $2 billion have been spent on this psychological warfare rubbish coming out of Hollywood. And what was fascinating is that back in 1997, right when this was happening, I'd gathered together the first sort of volley, as it were, of these top-secret witnesses that were going to meet with and brief these members of Congress and people from the Vice President's office, et cetera. And one of the people who was there was a man who had sat on an interagency committee back in the 70s, 74, that and what he was going to say, but the intelligence community took him out of the hotel that we had us all staying at the Westin Hotel in Georgetown in D.C. the night before these meetings because they did not want him to share what I'm about to tell everyone. And he was going to tell all these members of Congress, and some of the people that were chairmen of committees, by the way, and oversight committees for the U.S. government. He was going to tell them that he was on an interagency board and that he could confirm what Carol Rosin was told by Werner von Braun, who invented the Hitler V-2 rocket, and that is that they had these anti-gravity devices that were man-made and creatures that look like aliens but aren't. They're completely robotic kind of things like grays and whatnot, and that they had a plan at some point after they had kind of milked the world all they could out of the Cold War, and then he said there would be global terrorism. Now remember, this is 1997, but the thing that would follow that would be the alien threat from space, and that it was all completely a false flag machination of people who were making trillions of dollars from this game. And he was going to testify about the fact that even when he was involved in these committees back in 1974, that it was fully operational, that they could launch a hoaxed alien invasion type scenario and it would fool everyone. And so one of the problems with this is that, you know, the real ET contact experiences are like what you've just described, but there's a whole lot of disinformation out there that's designed to just scare the hell out of people, but you have to ask who benefits from that fear. Well, it's the same people who've been keeping this secret for 60 years, and as Eisenhower said, beware the military-industrial complex, and there are classified programs that really do want to focus the world not just on, you know, an East-West conflict, but eventually, like the movie Independence Day, where, you know, Will Smith says, let's go kick alien butt, sort of unite the world around a military junta to have interplanetary war. And Douglas MacArthur, his last speech to the country, General MacArthur's last speech to Congress, he said World War III will be interplanetary. So this machination and ridiculous scenario has been in the works for 50 years. And I think that one of the important things for people to know is that this fraud has got to be exposed for what it is. And people are being totally manipulated, and Hollywood, and also, I hate to say it, about 90% of the UFO subculture is complicit either wittingly or unwittingly. And this is a very, very dangerous game that's being played because we really can't trade, you know, one threat from the Cold War or a terrorist scenario for an alien threat that just keeps this fire burning indefinitely. And I think people have got to awaken to how easy it is for people to be deceived, and that we cannot allow ourselves to be deceived any longer.
Well, I don't even go there anymore. I have to tell you, I mean, it's my work is such a grassroots level and that's why I came forward after 7 years of anonymity. And as you can appreciate as a physician, not only to let people know that they're not alone, and most things can be explained, but when someone has an anomalous experience, it's real to them. And if you let it fester, it's not healthy. And just sharing it is really healthy, and also having the right perspective, as you just mentioned. The other part of it, and I'm working on a curriculum now actually for schools, is that we fear what we don't know. And like you said, so many people could just fall easily into believing whatever. And that's why it's important to study the data and to really look at what really happened here in Arizona, because there is so much data. In fact, some of the witnesses, and I know we don't have time today, I hope we can revisit this, but some of the witnesses shared with me that they had near-death experiences as children that was reawakened by the mass sighting, and I found that really curious because I did too, and I go into detail in my book, The Phoenix Lights of Skeptics' Discovery That We Are Not Alone, and share my near-death experience. But what was really poignant to me personally is I thought, geez, could there be a connection? And this really gets into the whole consciousness thing, not only in real time where people changed miraculously into a positive connectedness with these phenomena, but long term, I mean, people changed their eating habits, went into the environmental movement, the peace movement. I really woke up to the fact that we're not alone in this universe. But at any rate, when people were mentioning to me that they had this near-death experience, I thought, could there be a connection connection between all unexplained phenomena, near-death experience, out-of-body, unexplained aerial phenomena that have a mystical light associated with the experience. Lo and behold, I started finding very credible studies at university level, the Omega Project with Dr. Kenneth Ring and at University of Connecticut and Dr. Raymond Fowler and dozens of others that were really studying not only the fact that all these phenomena are very similar in the experience itself, and I lay that out very simply in the book, but the after effect, the positive awakening, the enlightenment, that connectiveness to the universe and the earth and to each other is realized for the first time in people and changes them forever. So it's really important to look at that aspect too when you're talking about a real anomalous experience. And I started calling all unexplained phenomena ups and up because they are an up, because it is so positive and so life-altering. And, we have a choice of whether we want to experience it or not or learn about it. And you can have that positive transformation by just reading and learning about it. I just urge people to take a look at the data because it really is profound and important. And now I'm working on a curriculum called Out of the Box for 5th to 12th grade because there is nothing, Steve, absolutely nothing in our classroom. And that's actually
and that's really an important point. We have a man on our team who's been teaching college-age students about this and has been using the disclosure book as a sort of a textbook for them. But I think that, and I think that's happened in a few other places, but that's something that really needs to occur. And it's like people have been miseducated and kept out of something that's a very big part of the story of the human race, but also the science and technology of the 20th century. And so, here we are still burning oil and gas and coal when classified programs have been studying this type of physics for a very, very long time, and have had operational systems since before I was born, and I'm no spring chicken. So I think that this is really important that kids understand that, and I think it's great that you're doing it. We're about out of time, so if you would like to share your website so people can find what you're doing and people can see the kind of evidence and things that we want to include in this film that we're doing at serious.neverendinglight.com, and so people can see what you've done in your books and videos.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for letting me share. There is so much more to the story. We didn't even get into how the story unfolded, which is in and of itself extremely poignant and important, how the puzzle pieces fit together when the USA Today article came out on June 18th and opened it up to international scrutiny, and the very next day our former governor calls a press conference and makes a joke out of it, bringing one of his aides in an alien head.
Yeah, I remember that. Well, he's come clean now. Well,
then 10 years after the 10th anniversary, he finally shared that he saw it, and it was not of this world. I mean, there is so much more to this story. So I do hope people, I had a 750-page journal that I squeezed the best into 250 pages and just came forward with the 3rd edition last year with what's happened since 2004 when I came forward after 7 years of anonymity, including the missing time story, and so much more. I mean, there is so much more to the story. And so I hope people pick up the Phoenix Lights, A Skeptic's Discovery That We Are Not Alone, our documentary, which also keeps evolving. Astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell is in it. We have some wonderful, wonderful people in it. I wish you were in it, Steve. Maybe one of these days we'll have to get you in it as well, because it keeps evolving, and we've won over a dozen International Film Festival awards, which is unheard of for a documentary, especially one of this genre, the Phoenix Lights We Are Not Alone documentary. And then the website, thephoenixlights.net, is packed with information, not only news reports, the latest updates. We have the photo page, which is a really unique collection, the only 35-millimeter evidence of these global phenomena, which now, when I came forward in 2004, Steve, the official and accepted, except for the witnesses and investigators, of course, explanation of the Phoenix Lights was that it was merely military illumination flares, and it has never been reenacted, even though the military tried. Nobody knows this unless they read my book. 3 years after the fact, they tried to reenact it, 3 Air National Guards, and it was a joke. In fact, the footage is on the news page on the Arizona.
Oh, yeah, the difference is so obvious. And
well, you just have to look at the data. So I hope people do and enjoy it, and contact me if you have any questions. I love to hear from people, and also share, because it is very cathartic and healing to share your experience, and keep looking up. Thank you so much, and I hope there is so much more to the story, so I hope we get to talk about it.
Well, we'll have to do it again another time, and we'll be touched about it's what the best of what you collected perhaps can be in this Emmy Award-winning filmmaker's film that we're working with.
That's wonderful. Good luck.
We're planning to come out in December of 2012, and so that we're really on a fast track for that. So folks who want to find out more about that can go to disclosureproject.org. And CSETI.org.
And that's what it's going to take, Steve, because it's teamwork, and it's all joining together to really make this happen and get the credible and information out there in a professional way, and so people can really see what's really going on.
Yes, we're going to put the best of the best in this, as well as the understanding, because over 50% of the people think that the UFOs are real and that we're not alone in the universe. What's not understood is what's behind the secrecy. What is the science of these technologies? What does the transdimensional perspective bring to our view of the current world and the future? And how are we going to make peaceful contact? And I think that, what can people, the average person, do? And one of the things I point out to people, we now have thousands of people around the world who've learned the CE5 protocols and are going into these groups that we have that coordinate globally on the same night each month to do the protocols, where there are amazing contact experiences happening from Malaysia to South Africa to China and all over. And so this is the kind of thing that happens and can happen now in the age of the internet and social media that couldn't happen 10 years ago. So it's very, very exciting what's happening. Yeah.
It is.
Well,
in fact,
thank you for sharing your time with us, and I'd like to thank the people at the World Puja Network for letting us have this time every 2 weeks. And you've been listening to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and I've been joined with Dr. Lynne Kietei, a fellow physician and a sojourner through these worlds of light and consciousness. And I'd thank you very much for being with us today, Dr. Kietei.